I want to just acknowledge how meaningful it is to be able to be together in this space with all of you. I want to also express appreciation to our Zoom community. We have dozens of people who are with us virtually as well, and it's delightful to have you and have you be part of our congregation, which includes, of course, hi, Mom and Dad. Moses appears before Pharaoh to try to secure the release of the Israelites from their Egyptian bondage. And when he goes before Pharaoh, Pharaoh makes a proposal. He says, listen, why don't you just go with the adults? And Moses says, no, we will only go with our young and our old. B'neireinu u'v'zikneinu nelech. To live and to thrive and survive in the desert, we're going to need multiple generations. We need a community that can support and learn from one another across different stages of life. And when we enter the promised land, if we're going to create the kind of sacred home for our people, we will need the wisdom that inheres in multi-generational community. I wonder, in our world of looking at face-to-face relationships and thinking about how we foster connections, if today we could spend a few moments thinking about how we build connections across generations and a little bit of our own relationship to the passage of time and our own aging. Because the holidays, I think, brings up that sense of time flowing. We are supposed to do tshuva every year to return to our truest, most authentic self, but inevitably that self is a year older. Kohelet teaches, the author of Ecclesiastes teaches, that there is a time for everything under heaven. So I wonder if we can find the wisdom that comes from the passage of time and the wisdom to relate to generations at different stages in our lives. In Hebrew, there are two words for the quality of aging. One is seva. Seva means simply to become old. It's the physical process. It may be a reference actually to graying hair. And so when you say that someone has grown to a seva tova, all you mean is that they've gotten old in reasonably good health. A zaken, by contrast, is a word that includes as its primary meaning that sense of getting older, but it also has an idea of acquiring a quality of wisdom along the way. So a zaken is somebody who's not only old, but also has perhaps acquired a measure of wisdom or even leadership. In thinking about stages of our lives, there are some when we are younger that are filled with promise and new beginnings. They are entirely about opportunities and doors that open up to us. But other stages can be more challenging because they include also aging, decay, and loss. So I got an email recently that highlighted my own aging. Carol has a cousin named Jake who's moving into the area of longevity medicine. Longevity medicine is this type of practice where you pay a little bit extra. It's usually not covered by health insurance. And you have certain kinds of body scans following blood markers in order to ideally slow the aging process, to live as long and as well as possible. So I was talking to Jake about this, and he stuck me on his email distribution list of tips of how to put off aging. So I got this one that was talking about VO2 max. So for those of you who don't know, and some of you do, VO2 max is the amount of oxygen you can absorb at maximum exertion. And there's a strong correlation between that number and health and longevity. So as a result, Jake is urging us, the readers of his email, to improve that number through interval training. Interval training means push yourself to exertion, hold that for a period of time, kind of back off, and then push yourself to full exertion again, okay? So I get this email, and I'm reading it on my couch, and I want you to understand, all I did was stand up, and I pulled something in my back, and I was hobbling around for the rest of the day, and it took me most of the week to get back to walking normally. And I was so aggravated by Jake sending me an email that aimed at healthy 30 and 40-year-olds because as a 55-year-old man with some back troubles, it kind of ticked me off. Now, I want to tell you, there are things I am happy about in this stage of my life. I feel more comfortable in myself than I ever have. I feel like I have reservoirs of compassion and patience that were lacking at other stages of my life. And I miss the resilience in my body that I had 20 or even 30 years ago. Kohelet teaches Hakol Hevel, everything is fragile and finite. And he sees in this a catastrophe. that our aging means we ultimately wither and the impact that we leave on the world will fade and disappear. But I want to suggest that maybe there's an opportunity for wisdom in the finite nature of our life. Heschel talks about aging as well. You know, for us in our culture, I think we tend to look down on aging. We try to hide it. We cover it over in a variety of different ways. And as people become truly older or elderly, we often create places and homes and facilities so that we don't have to look at the elderly all but too often. Heschel suggests maybe there's a different way of viewing aging. He writes in part, according to all the standards we employ, the aged person is condemned as inferior, conditioned to operating as a machine for the making and spending of money, with all other relationships dependent upon its efficiency. The moment the machine is out of order and beyond repair, one begins to feel like a ghost without a sense of reality. May I suggest, he says, that man's potential for change and growth is much greater than we are willing to admit, and that old age be regarded not as the age of stagnation, but as the age of opportunity for inner growth. The years of old age, he concludes, are indeed formative years, rich in possibilities. So if there is a wisdom in aging, perhaps there can be a wisdom in noticing the finite nature of our lives, of realizing how much we want to value each day because our days are limited. Mark Twain, in his book, The Diary of Adam and Eve, in which he retells the Adam and Eve story in somewhat humorous fashion, captures some of this quality. He imagines Adam as not the brightest guy ever, though I suppose he's the only man in the universe at the time, so whatever. And as Eve comes into his world, he is initially frustrated by the demands and the expectations that she places on him, both to do various household tasks and simply to be attentive to her. He just wants to lie in his hammock. And he says, I'll get to it tomorrow, because he has an infinity of tomorrows in front of him, so what's the rush? And then they eat the apple, and something changes in the world. They notice suddenly violence and even death. And Adam gets out of his hammock and he realizes the need and the urgency for what Eve is saying, and even more, the value of having Eve in his life. The last of Adam's entries in the diary reads as follows. After all these years, I see that I was mistaken about Eve in the beginning. It is better to live outside the garden with her than inside it without her. At first, I thought she talked too much. Now I would be sorry to have the voice fall silent and out of my life. Blessed be the apple that brought us near together and taught me to know the goodness of her heart and the sweetness of her spirit. And there's a coda at the very end of the book that talks about her grave marker, and it's inscribed there, Adam, where Eve was, there was Eden. In noticing our finite nature, there is a wisdom that emerges. The psalmist says, teach us to number our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom. And part of that is recognizing what we do miss in each stage. I remember, for example, and miss the little boy and the two little girls who used to live in my house. You know, Josh, my eldest, I do have a son. Some of you haven't met him. My son, Josh, who's now 29, when he was 2, 3, 4 years old, he liked to play Star Wars with me, which looked like this. He'd say, you be Darth Vader, I'll be Luke Skywalker, and we'd pick up our plastic lightsabers and we'd bang them around for a while. But then Josh being Josh, we'd stop and he'd try to talk me out of being evil. Vader, he would say, you know that the dark side will lose and the light will always win. I miss the innocence, the hopefulness, the playfulness of that little boy. But I've also made room in my heart for the man that he is now, to watch the loving relationship he has with his husband, Cam, to see the quality of the person that he is in his relationships. I'm so proud of the man that he's become. Teach us to number our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom. There's a documentary right now on Netflix called Daughters. It follows a group of 4 incarcerated men who are serving serious time for various crimes that they've committed. And around a dance that they're able to go to, they're invited to participate in a program where their daughters will come to the prison and they'll have a daddy-daughter dance. And so as we get to know these families, we see Aubrey, who's 6 years old, calling her father in prison. And as Addie Grace points out, the filmmakers are very clever in the way they film. They use a different style of filming inside and outside the prison to kind of accentuate the distance that's created between the father and the daughter, between the way they're each experiencing the passage of time. So Aubrey, 6 years old, calls her dad, and she starts babbling on about a recent storm. It was raining, and it was drippy, and it was so wet, and I could hear it, and it was loud. And then as we get this experience of kind of a normal phone call, this voice intrudes and says, "This is a call from a federal prison." And the strangeness, the distance reasserts itself. We see then these fathers getting ready for the dance, learning about parenting and social skills. And then the day arrives where the girls run into the prison gym, and we see Aubrey run over to her father yelling, "Daddy, Daddy!" And she puts her arms around his neck and she bursts into tears. And we see them a little bit later having dinner together. And remember, Aubrey's 6. And she's talking about having learned the multiplication tables. And so she starts reciting them to her father. She says, 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 3 is 6, and so forth. She goes on for a while. And her father is listening, rapt to every word, so enamored of being in the presence of his daughter, of being able to physically connect with her, that he listens to every number and thought and idea. And we see them at the dance, and he's swinging her around to hip-hop tunes, and they're saying, "I'll never, never let you go," even though we as the viewers know there's just a few more moments together, and they'll have to be separated again. My friends, we who seemingly have all the time in the world, can't we find a few moments to give our loved ones attention and awareness? Can't even in moments that might seem a little dull or not so stimulating, like maybe pushing a small child on a swing or listening to someone tell us of all of their issues, maybe those can be moments where we really show up and bring our attention and realize what a blessing it is simply to be in the presence and with our loved one. Teach us to number our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom. Al-Shach, the 16th century Sephardic authority, writes the following on this verse from Psalms. He notices an oddity in the verse. The word for heart, normally pronounced lev in Hebrew, in this verse is levav. There's an extra vet in the word. And he says, why? Because the wisdom we acquire comes through duality. We know we are going to die, and we know we have time left to grow and improve. We know that we have appetites and failings that repetitively get us into trouble. And we know that we have a compassion and love and goodness. So for Al-Shach, our wisdom emerges in recognizing the dualities in our lives and being able to learn from those conflicts. And by pointing out that additional letter in the heart, he's inviting us to realize that when we can let our hearts grow from a lev to a levav, when we can acquire that extra chamber of compassion and love, we can find the way to build the bridges across generations that we so much need in our lives. Because there are generational moments that are difficult. I think, for example, of the relationships between parents and teens. As parents, we are so excited to watch our teens emerge into adolescence. These strange creatures who used to recite the multiplication tables are now taking a real interest in our lives and the world around us, and it's amazing, and we just want to have moments of deep connection with them. But our teens, by contrast, at that moment are trying to develop their autonomy and their own social relationships, and they just want the car keys. But I feel like when we let our heart grow from a lev to a levav, when we acquire that extra chamber, there is a capacity to make time for both, to create opportunities for real conversation where we are listening and learning from each other's wisdom, and where we become each other's partners in developing children's autonomy, in giving them occasions to hand them the keys. There's another fraught generational moment that I've begun to notice recently. That is some of the conflict that arises between adult children and their aging parents. This is all people in their 50s and 60s talk about, my friends. It goes something like this. You walk into your parents' home, maybe where you grew up or a place they've been living the last few years, and you look at the rug on the floor and you say, "Oh my gosh, that's a tripping hazard." and you go up the stairs that you walked up and down innumerable times, and you say, Mom cannot be allowed to keep going up and down those stairs. She's going to trip and fall. And our parents, by contrast, look and they see this home, this place where they've lived for years or decades, a place where they've raised children that's filled with memories and love and a sense of their own vitality and autonomy. And they say, what do you mean, leave my house? This is the place that I love. But again, I feel like if we let our hearts grow, if we let that extra vet emerge, there's an opportunity to listen and make time for both concerns, to really be able to hold on to our desires for our parents' healthy aging, even as we listen to our parents' desires for strength, autonomy, and a sense of self. Teach us to number our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom. Carol's mother, Lynn Cleverton, who we always referred to as Grandma Lynn, died a couple months last year before the holidays. I always joke that I won the mother-in-law lottery. She was a wonderful and caring person. She used to listen actually to my High Holidays material. And when she could no longer have those conversations, it was a sad moment. Maytal's actually stepped up to help me out with the material. Carol's mom in her aging, Lynn in her aging, had a difficult journey. She had Parkinson's, and late-stage Parkinson's is no joke. She had neurological impact as well, so there were some times where she had hallucinations and fears, fantasies that arose, and that was hard for Carol and her brother Joe to manage. But even in the worst of it, Lynn found the wisdom to show up as a parent. That meant that she would be careful to always tell her children how much she loved them whenever she spoke to them. It meant that she parceled out some of the responsibilities of caring for her to make sure that both Carol and Joe felt like they were needed by her. Carol loved to travel and be with her and to do things for her physically. She wore these pressure socks that she needed that were hard for her to remove. And Carol liked taking them off and rubbing lotion into her mom's legs. Or she appreciated being able to brush her mother's hair. Her mom was always an elegant woman, and so to restore some of her beauty was something that Carol appreciated, even as it brought up memories for her of being a little girl and her mom brushing her hair. And when she told me this story, I was so amazed by the woman that I've married and the daughter that she is. Lynn told us that she never wanted to be a burden, and she never was. For all the challenges of travel and visit and being present with Lynn, I know that Carol experienced it as a gift, as a way to pay back in some small measure all the love and wisdom and goodness that her mother had offered her. May Lynn's memory indeed be for a blessing. And let's say, Amen. Teach us to number our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom. There are moments that we experience in each stage that may be blessings or curses. And sometimes even we may experience a curse that later becomes a treasured memory or blessing. Think, for example, of the young parent who has a child, a baby, crying inconsolably in the night and gets out of bed and goes to try and pick up that child. You know, we're all better parents at 2 p.m. than 2 a.m. And holds this baby crying inconsolably until finally she burps and falls asleep. And that moment that felt so difficult at the time becomes a treasured memory, because in that moment we could hold our child and solve all of her needs and settle her back down to a good night's sleep. When we're fortunate, we encounter elders along the way who help us in our journeys. I remember, for example, Alice Stiebel, Zichrona Livracha, who passed away this year, who gave Carol and me the book Siblings Without Rivalry, that changed our parenting so much for the better. Or I think about the challenges of this stage in my life, to be present for my parents in their aging, to let go of my own fears and anxieties about them, the fears it awakens of my own aging, and to set an intention of love and compassion and presence so that together we can walk through this next stage in their life together. Teach us to number our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom. When we're older, there may be a chance to reflect, as Heschel hints, to write down some of these things that we've learned over the course of our lives. You may know the Jewish practice of ethical wills. So the opportunity is, along with giving away our physical belongings, to also offer some of the hard-won wisdom of our life as a gift and a blessing to our heirs and descendants. Or think of the Talmud that so often has rabbis speaking in the names of their beloved teachers. The wisdom of that book arises because generations are learning from each other, are talking, engaging, arguing, and all of it in love and in wisdom. There's one other intergenerational challenge I want to highlight. Our rabbis teach that when a zaken, when an elder forgets his Torah through no fault of his own, meaning through dementia, through senility, we should continue to accord that person the same kavod, the same honor that we always gave them. Why? Because in the Aron and the Holy Ark that was carried in the desert, there were both the whole tablets, the luchot that Moses brought down the second time, but also the shivrei luchot, the broken tablets that Moses had shattered, that we bring honor even, as it were, to that brokenness. And so I've been thinking about this recently because I've had a couple of conversations with my dad on the phone, where he'll ask me a question and we'll talk for a little bit, and then he'll repeat the same question. And we'll go a little bit longer and he'll hear another question that he said earlier. And it's disconcerting and it's hard because I know it's only going to get worse. And I find it amusing, actually, the types of questions that he repeats are ones where he likes the answer. He'll ask often about you two, about my girls. He wants to hear good reports of them or something nice happening at the synagogue. He kept asking me, how's the membership doing this year? I'm like, it was good this year. He liked that answer. And so it's my responsibility to show up for my dad with the same kavod that I've always given him, to recognize my father and to be present for him, even in this quality of his aging. Kohelet was right. There is a time for everything under the heavens. The holidays have so many different elements of it. There is a quality of joy. It's a time for joy where we get to be together with one another and all our generations across this campus. You know, this is, Rabbi Graf commented on her tenure last night, this is my 20th high holidays at Kol Hamet. It's hard for me to believe. And I love the community more than I ever have. And it's a time for reflection. I cannot believe I've been here 20 years. I really don't feel that old. And it's a time for gratitude. I am grateful for people like Sam and Socorro Lepler, who I got to officiate at their wedding years ago, and this summer to be present and officiate at their son Sean's bar mitzvah. Or Aviva Kunioshi, who I held when she was barely 2 hours old for the first time, and that I got to hear read Torah and Haftarah just a few months ago. It's also a time for sadness. There are people that I look around and I miss. I miss, for example, Norm Simmons, who passed away a few months ago. He came to everything. He liked coming to my Intro to Judaism class. You should know it's a 1-year curriculum. He came 5 years in a row because he loved getting to meet these new people, young couples who are drawing close to Judaism and trying to understand the next stage of their life. He hung on their wisdom and their experience, and I miss him. I want you to look around for a moment and notice that this is what thriving intergenerational community looks like. When you think about this space and our whole campus, we are here with our young and our old together, and something marvelous emerges as a result. I want you to appreciate the stage in which you are in with all of its blessings and curses, because you only get to live it once. I want you to let your heart expand from a lev to a levav, to develop extra chambers of compassion and love, because in that way we can offer and receive the love and wisdom that comes from many generations. And I invite you to notice the wisdom that comes from each moment and year, so that we can become not just older, but zkenim, people of wisdom. Teach us to number our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom. Amid all our love and joy, the loss and heartbreak, help us learn and grow. Yehi ratzon milifanecha, may it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that our hearts can always grow a little more, to make space both for the losses and grief, but also for the hope, the joy, and the love that arises in new stages. Help us find a path of wisdom that honors who we have been and who we are becoming. And let's all say, Amen. Gamar Chatima Tova. Ozi v'zimrat ya, vayehi li l'shua. Ozi v'zimrat ya.